second segment tonight, True Crime AZ Live on the docket. We're talking Luigi Mangione, the suspect that so many people are fascinated with for a slew of reasons. Many people have become fans of Luigi. People hate Luigi. There's not much more I have to say on that because you know what I'm talking about. Luigi, the 27-year-old accused of killing United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson outside a New York hotel last year. You've probably seen that video, and a lot of people paying attention to the case ever since. Luigi back in court this week, but a win for his defense team. A New York State judge dismissing the state terrorism charges against Luigi, which means in New York now, for the state charges, he is only left with second-degree murder. Now, what does this all mean? What are we looking at here? What does this mean for the case? It has some implications, but there's quite a bit more to this case than people maybe even realize. You probably know who Luigi is, but you might not know that there are state and federal charges in this case. So the state of New York, had these terrorism charges actually gone through, that could have upped his sentence to a mandatory life sentence. But without the terrorism charges, if he were to be convicted of second-degree murder, which is what he's being charged with in New York, he would be looking at 25 years behind bars. However, the federal government has charged him with other charges. These include stalking, but it also includes a federal murder charge. That carries a possible death penalty sentence. And you're looking at video on your screen right now of Luigi in court this week. The newest photos and videos we have of him in his kind of beige jail smock, I don't know, whatever you want to call that. But Luigi was in court learning about this today, or this week. And so I was looking at this case kind of from a totality standpoint of, all right, we've seen the video of him allegedly lying in wait to shoot Brian Thompson. We know what went into this. We know about the investigation. How did we get to terrorism charges in the first place? I mean, I think we all know typically what a terrorism charge means, but when we're actually looking at it in a legal sense, they're typically brought against people who want to intimidate a certain population or impact a government and its decision making. So that didn't really seem to fit with, you know, allegedly killing a CEO and shooting him. What did that have to do with one another? Well, I interviewed two former U.S. attorneys, Dennis K. Burke and Paul Charlton. Both of them served as U.S. attorney here in Arizona. And I was trying to get their take on everything with the case moving forward. But I asked both of them, okay, how do we get to terrorism charges in the first place? Like, where did that come from? Can you see it all? Why? And while they believe the judge was pretty particular this week about saying, yeah, that's not going to work, they could kind of see from a prosecutor's standpoint where they might have gone with terrorism. Take a listen.
But I would assume that the prosecutors looked at this and said he went after the top executive of a health insurance company because of the policies and how the company was operating. So from a prosecutor's perspective, it would be, this wasn't a family murder. This wasn't a financial dispute. This is someone he didn't even know. He went after him because of his status, and his status is the top executive of a major health company, a health insurance company. Insurance is a key word. So I assume that's what the prosecutors were thinking as to why they even took a chance at getting this past a judge. From the judge's ruling, it's pretty solid. He said, you don't have any evidence. You don't have evidence to indicate that this defendant was trying to inspire fear in the general population, or was trying to terrorize a government or the policy of a government.
A judge, I think, has politely but firmly told the prosecutors, you got it wrong here. And as I say, to their credit, the prosecutors have accepted the judge's decision and they're moving forward with the charge that remains.
Talk about those charges that remain. There is, it's not unheard of for there to be state and federal charges in a case. And you even heard Ken Williams referring to that possibly being the case with Tyler Robinson in the Charlie Kirk shooting, that we could see other charges like terrorism possibly tacked on from the federal government. That is not necessarily unheard of. What is odd is that both the states and the feds are charging Luigi Mangione with murder. That is typically like these jurisdictions will talk to each other and say, all right, you're going to take this charge or you're going to take this one. never, at least in my career, have I seen somebody be charged with murder from both jurisdictions. And there might be a reason as to why. So in New York, I mentioned he's facing second-degree murder. And in talking to these past U.S. attorneys, both of them agree. Everyone's very confused with what New York is doing based on the fact that almost all of the evidence in this case seems to point to this being a planned attack. And so they both address this with me, why there might be two different charges, confusion as to what the state of New York is doing.
I'm as perplexed as you are by state, New York state criminal law. There's nothing more, premeditated than this. I mean, that's why the feds have a potential stalking charge. I mean, in other words, this wasn't a bar fight that resulted in a death. This was an act of passion. This incredibly planned out.
This was about as clear a premeditated act as you could imagine, right? There's a lot of, at least in the press and in the media, indication that he was literally waiting for this individual, had gone to the hotel, had plans to run into this individual and shoot him, execute him style. So that sounds like premeditation, which, as you know, is typically a first-degree murder charge. So it's unusual, striking to me that they didn't allege first-degree murder here in the state system. I suspect what happened was this was so high profile and so shocking and so unnecessary a death. All murders and homicides are unnecessary, but this one in particular seems so much to capture the attention of everyone that it may be that both jurisdictions are thinking, in order to truly deter similar behavior in the future, we want to do both state and federal prosecution.
Talking to both of them, they're very much in agreement on that. I can tell you, I'm not an attorney, but I can tell you based on what I know here in Arizona, there's no way that Luigi would have been charged with second-degree murder here. That easily would have been a first-degree murder charge here in Arizona. But that really does go to the point that these states really vary in how they handle cases. It's clear that the feds want the death penalty to be involved here. And I was looking at the death penalty in New York because had they filed a first-degree murder charge and had the death penalty been sought out for Luigi in the state of New York, I thought, well, I wonder how long it takes or how they go about the execution process there. Well, turns out the last time New York executed somebody was in 1963. So there was probably, I'd be willing to say almost a 100% chance that even if they did sentence Luigi to death in the state of New York, he never would have been executed. It is much different here in Arizona, though things have gone through shifts of being higher or lower in terms of executions. We still do them. We have one scheduled for next month. So it is really, really different state by state. Interestingly enough, in this case, there's going to be all eyes on this. We know this. From now all the way at every hearing until there is a trial in Luigi's case. Think about all the shows that you guys like, crime dramas, courtroom dramas. When you're in there, typically the most important thing that captivates people so much are opening statements. The state and the defense will lay out their cases, all their evidence that they have, what they're going to point to, why their client is either guilty or not guilty. And that's the part that really captivates everybody. I would argue typically that opening statements can be some of the most important parts of a trial. The part that as media we don't always pay as much attention to is jury selection. It's almost like, a little process that happens before that we monitor, but we're not going with our cameras live and everything until the actual trial begins with those opening statements. But in talking to Dennis Burke, he said in this case, jury selection may be the absolute most important part of this entire case, this entire trial for Luigi Mangione. Why? Because one or two jurors, depending on how they feel even about the healthcare system, could affect, could convince, could sway that jury from possible conviction to possible acquittal and everything in between, including a hung jury. And so when you're picking a jury, they give them a juror questionnaire. And those often involve questions like, do you believe in the death penalty? How do you feel about, X, Y, and Z? If let's say it's somebody that's in the LGBTQ community, they'll ask how you feel about that, as they're trying to weed out who they don't want on the jury and who each side wants on the jury. And so in this case, Dennis Burke was telling me not only does he think this will be the most important part of this case given the nature of it, but he actually gave us an idea of what he thinks will be on that juror questionnaire in terms of questions that they'll see.
As a defense counsel, you would look to see during picking the jury, who can I get, that could basically hang a jury or make an argument in a jury deliberation as to why there should be acquittal. 100% guarantee that the questions to the potential jurors are going to be, have you had health insurance claims? You or anyone in your family, are you a customer of United Health? B, have you ever had a claim denied? Have you ever had to appeal a claim? There's going to be intense amount of questions directed at that to figure out, we can't afford, the prosecution is going to look at that and say, we can't afford to have that individual picked, because all that's going through their mind is, my son had the same situation as this defendant. If I were a prosecutor on this team in this matter, I would have concern about the fact of how the public has reacted to this defendant and what he did, and how that's going to play out in front of a jury.
And they will probably be hard pressed to find a jury that hasn't heard of this case, or at least doesn't have an opinion in this case. I think in this day and age, it's a lot harder to pick a jury for that reason, because people can see things on social media and have so much more access to things. If they weren't watching TV back in the day, or reading a newspaper, maybe they hadn't heard of the case at all. But of course now it's everywhere, no matter what app you're on. No trial dates have been set yet in either his federal case or his state case. His next court date is in December, so we've got a couple months before we'll see Luigi Mangione again. But you could call this a win for his defense team this week, getting those state terrorism charges dropped. Of course, we'll be following this case along with the rest of the country who's obsessed with this case as it plays itself out. Coming up next,